I'm sure most of you know Joe Basta, who's been one of our mediators for a very long time, and also our board chair for a while, and a very important person to us at the DRC. And we're delighted to have you here.
Thank you. Good to be here. This is sort of like old home week. I hope I'm going to wander around here, Craig. So I hope it doesn't disturb you. I teach a upper level seminar at the Law School of Michigan State, and my ideal number is 14. I've got 15 here, which is pretty close. Now this is a slightly different audience because I'm guessing the average age of the law students is about 25. So this is a more mature and a more experienced crowd.
What do you mean we're all 25 here?
Before we get started, well, some of you may know this is a Global Awareness Week, and I want to give you just a quick quiz. The Learning Center asked me to do this, and if you would, here, Al, if you would take this and take these and pass it to Liz, pass those down that way. And Andy, if you would pass yours down that way. And just take a minute to do the quiz. And then Al, when you're done, I'm going to ask you to, pass them down this way all the way to Sally, and Andy, I'll have you pass them down the table here, okay?
No. How many jelly beans are in my jar? I are we doing this?
So you don't have to labor over this. It's just quick and easy exercise to test one small part of your global knowledge. And if you don't know the answer to the population of Turkey, and no devices either. Okay. Okay. No devices. Send them down there. Just send them all down that way. All the way down to Sally.
I've got one.
Okay. Yeah. Pass them down. Oh yeah. Okay, you got them all? All right. No. You haven't done yours?
But I've got it.
Whatever. I was going to ask you to do a test too. Maybe I can ask Ruth to do it when you're done. We got them, all of them down here and all of them down there. No. You hang on to those because I'm going to ask you to average it. Could you do that? Just average the guesstimates. So we get an average of the guesses by this half of the group, and you can use, for that you can use a device.
What kind of average do you want?
Just
add them up and divide by.
Yeah, add them up and divide by the number of guesses, so we have an average. We have an average guess. Okay. All right, and while you do that, let me get started here. Thanks for coming in. This is a subject near and dear to my heart because it's well, like most of you, I fancy myself to be a very rational kind of guy, a linear thinker, very logical, not governed by emotions. And unfortunately, the more I study and read about what's going on in brain science and what the economists and social psychologists and other sort of people are coming up with, the more humbling I find the experience, because it turns out that I'm not nearly as rational as I think I am. That many of my thought processes are governed by unconscious mechanisms of which I'm barely aware, and that more often than not, my emotions are in control. So I find this all a very humbling and refreshing experience. But this is it's a fascinating and exciting field. And the subject that I've got a number of things I could talk about, but we mentioned in the advertisement that it was going to be brain science, which today means pretty much the discipline of what the social scientists and psychologists call heuristics. I just put the spelling of the word up on the board. And a heuristic is a simple procedure that helps us find adequate, although imperfect, answers to difficult questions. That's the sophisticated definition of the term. And interestingly enough, it has the same root as the Greek word eureka. So I suppose in a way heuristics are, it's their own, it's a remarkable discipline in and of itself. And just so you won't shoot the messenger and think that I'm making this up, the discipline, the whole body of heuristics, the short, and we're talking about shorthand ways in which we navigate experience, the way we process information, whether we're meeting people, whether we're in school, doesn't matter what we're doing. We all have shorthand ways of processing information and navigating life and dealing with other people. That's basically heuristics. And the lion's share of the work that's been done in the field, really starting in the 70s and 80s and moving onward, has been done and amassed by two guys. One by the name of Amos Tversky, who is now deceased, and another fellow by the name of Daniel Kahneman, who is now on the faculty at Princeton. And these are the people that have really put together, that are really responsible for most of the top 10 psychological traps, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And the folks who have really pioneered the field of heuristics. And interestingly enough, in 2002, Kahneman and Tversky were awarded a Nobel Prize in economics for the work that they did in heuristics. So they've been internationally recognized as pioneers and top dogs in the field. So the stuff that I'm telling you comes, and some of which you're familiar with, you've been taught as mediators, things like framing, notions of loss aversion and whatnot, which we'll touch on. Those kind of things really emerged from a lot of the research that was done by Tversky and Kahneman. So we owe these folks a tremendous debt of gratitude for discovering and synthesizing how we behave and how we're wired. One of the books I'm going to recommend to you, and from which I've synthesized more of the material, is a book that Kahneman wrote. This appeared on the New York Times bestseller list in 2011, called "Thinking Fast and Slow." And this book is chock full of interesting little tidbits and pieces of research in the field of heuristics, discussing really remarkable and interesting and shocking things about how we make decisions and why and how we behave the way we do. And since this whole process I think is really critical to mediators, all mediators, it's not an easy read. I mean, it's a slow go, but I commend it to you as part of your ongoing learning process as a mediator. But before I get into heuristics, one of the things that, well, is directly related to heuristics is the whole role of perceptions and the role that subjective perceptions play in how we make decisions. Take a look at what I've written up here on the board, and I'll give you 20 seconds, and do me this favor. Count the F's in what I've written on the board. Just count to yourself.
Tell me the title of the book again. The art of moving fast and slow.
Thinking.
Thinking fast and slow. How many Fs?
11.
10.
11.
Oh, how many? 10?
9.
9? 9?
11.
11?
10.
10? There are 11. There are 11 Fs. 11 Fs on the board. So why? You're all intelligent people. You're relatively close to the board. Presumably everybody can see. Why could you not count all the Fs and count them correctly? Hmm? Liz?
See what we don't think is important.
Yeah, so did you ever hear what Liz said? We don't see what we think is not important. And what might not be important on the board? Right. Some of the articles, I mean, we tend to read pieces like this in chunks, huh? So you swallow the whole thing in big chunks and don't notice the details. Any other reason?
I can't spell, so effective for me at just one F.
All right. Anybody else?
Time.
Any other reason? Time, yeah, the time pressure almost always will throw us off.
Your mind drifts. Your mind drifts.
Your mind drifts. Okay, lack of attention. There's a whole host of reasons. You may not have had a particularly good vantage point here in the room. Some of us may not see as well as others. It's a very simple and crude exercise to demonstrate in concrete terms how perception can differ from one person to the other. We may selectively perceive or differ in perception of a whole host of things: facts, people, interests, history, fairness, resources, abilities, timing, costs, rules, a whole host of things about which we could differ. And I think as mediators, it's important to keep in mind what some will call the subjectivity principle, which essentially stands for the proposition that we see the world as we are, rather than as it really is in reality. Some have called this the Rashomon effect. Maybe you've seen the movie. There was a movie about the death of a Japanese samurai warrior, and it was told from two different perspectives. Some of you have read The Girl on the Train or seen the movie of The Girl on the Train, which tells the story from different perspectives. And some of you may have seen, there was a show, I don't know if it was on Showtime or HBO, something called The Affair, which each week told the same, explained the same set of circumstances, but from different perspectives. And the story of the same affair would be entirely different from, almost entirely different from player to player. So why is it? I mean, I assume you as mediators, especially, you learn to accept the proposition that we see the world as we are, rather than as it is. Why? What are the factors that you think account for the subjectivity that we bring to everyday life? We talked about vantage points a little bit with respect to the thing that I put up on the board. But what else? What things would account for the fact that I see the world differently than Al does?
You're much younger than I am, Joe.
Much younger?
Much younger.
I wouldn't bet on it. Okay.
I'm 81, where are you?
Well,
He's much younger.
you got me. You have me by almost 11. Okay.
No.
So what difference would that make?
Well, it's life experiences in different times. I'm a pre-war World War II baby. You're a post-war II.
Okay. Absolutely. Different experiences. What else?
Well, our whole personal history.
Personal history, which could include what? Yeah. What?
Well, it might include cases that we are mediating, and so.
Would you have even more basic than that?
Friends,
What else?
families, Friends, family, teachers.
Friends, family, teachers, right? Education, personal background, all the personal experiences. What? Apart from those, what about?
Religion, culture, and gender?
Genetics,
Religion, culture, and gender?
Religion, cultural agenda, all of those.
genetics.
A couple of things that we don't often think about. We each endow whatever we experience with its own meaning. Experiences have different meaning to each one of us, and we also endow our experiences with different values. One other contributing factor here that we don't often think about is that what we sense is unconsciously transformed, within our mental field to create a sense of harmony and balance. Okay, we each have a way of kind of navigating things, so they have a certain rightness to us, and they make a certain sense to us. And you see this on a national or more general scale. Whenever we as a society go through any kind of a national tragedy, take the shootings at Columbine for an example, something that totally boggles the mind of most people. The first thing that everybody tries to do, the first thing all reporters do, is come up with a motivation. Why did this kid do this, or why did these kids do this? How did something like this happen? That's a good illustration of the natural tendency we all have to try and to achieve some kind of psychological balance among all of the inputs that we get from various sources. So it's all of these things: the vantage points, the values, the way we endow things with meaning, our unique experiences and whatnot, and our quest for balance. That lead to the subjectivity principle, the fact that the world we see is as we are, rather than as it is in reality. Something to keep in mind that's sort of kind of background for the research and the work that Tversky and Kahneman have done.
Joe, I have a very basic question. So the work I do does not admit that there is a world as it is in reality. Okay, so for me to even understand that concept is next to impossible.
Say again, repeat that louder for everybody here.
Okay, so you said the world as is in reality. For me, there is no world as is in reality.
Okay.
Okay, in my field of study, that doesn't exist.
And your field of study is?
Heuristics.
Heuristics. All right. Well, but that's to me. You simply illustrate the principle. Okay. We have a different perception of what reality is. Okay. We tend to think that reality occurs something outside of us. If we're not there, I mean, you have the old Zen. What is it? The old, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make any noise? That sort of thing. And if you follow what's going on in quantum physics, in science, there's a lot of evidence for the proposition that it's a participatory universe, and things don't seem to happen unless there are observers there to see them occur. Quantum physics and quantum mechanics is way beyond me, but I think this is an illustration of the point that everybody sees the world differently. Anyway, back to back to the whole business of heuristics and the notion of thinking fast and slow. Kahneman has come up with this theory that our thought processes really depend upon two systems, System 1 and System 2. Some have likened System 1 to what occurs in the amygdala, the reptilian part of the brain, and some have equated System 2 with what goes on in the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain which helps us to reason logically and rationally. But his theories are not that simple. They're hypothetical systems. You can't point to specific parts of the brain and say, this is all System 1 or another part of the brain, and say that this is System 2. Nevertheless, he's come up with a scheme of organization that pretty well covers a lot of human behavior and helps us put into various categories how we think and feel and process information. System 1, okay. System 1 is fast. This is the intuitive part of the brain, if you will. What some people refer to as the gut. The instinctive, creative, instantaneous, automatic response to information or inputs of any kind. System 2 is the slow, deliberative part of the brain, conscious reasoning, has to figure things out. System 1 finds things easy and rapid and automatic. System 2, not at all. System 2 finds things more difficult and harder. I don't have a photo here, but
That's me.
if I were to put up a picture that more accurately depicted this, and even with that silly little drawing, you immediately, instantaneously reach a conclusion as to what I put up there. That this is a sad face, this is a frown, and it's going to bring to mind all sorts of things associated with sad frowning people. That's a System 1, what Kahneman would say a System 1 response. The same kind of response I might have to any one of you, or you meet somebody on the street and you immediately form a conclusion as to whether they're a friend or foe, whether you should flee or stay there. The kind of instantaneous judgment we make all the time. So when you look at the picture, you instantaneously react. What happens when I show you 17 times 24? You have the same instantaneous reaction. If you have one, it's probably, oh my God, how am I supposed to figure this out? Dealing with 17 times 24 is a System 2 phenomenon. In order to figure that out, you're going to have to put in some effort, put in some work to determine what the answer is.
My System 1 said that's a picture of math anxiety. My instantaneous System 1 said that's a picture of math anxiety.
Well,
The combination.
but the point is you can't you have to go further in order to come to some kind of conclusion, you know. But the fact that math anxiety may in fact be a System 1 reaction to it.
But it was to the whole thing combined.
But it's
I don't have to deal with that, I just have to realize.
Right. Well,
Anxiety producing.
System 2 for a lot of us is lazy. Okay, it doesn't want to deal with difficult things. It's easier. It's much easier to rely on System 1 to make these judgments and then to cruise along than to engage in harder, more critical thought. This is one reason why it's so easy for us, depending upon your political or other point of view, you know, to focus on one newspaper and skim over what's in the opposite point of view, because to critically examine the point of view requires hard work. Ange, yes.
I have a little bit of a problem with this because we get more than 60,000 messages a minute coming through our hands. And so if you're from this culture, you perceive that as a negative.
Perceive what is a negative?
The face that's upside down. If you had no idea what that is or what that is, you wouldn't have that same interpretation. So I think that it's a bit simplistic to say that this, because it removes, everything comes from the brain, it removes the heart. So you remove the heart from the level of communication because it's all brain-centered.
Yeah, but
But the reality is what you're doing is you're creating. So anything you say or do, you're creating a situation. So if we're all in a negative situation, if we all come in a bad mood, we're all going to feed off the bad mood that we're in.
that's right.
No, I won't let you.
What?
That's right.
I
You
won't
will.
let you.
You will all feed off a bad mood. That's the default system one response would be to feed off everybody else's bad mood. A system 2 response would be, just because you're bummed out and feeling bad, or even things went bad this morning, doesn't mean that the rest of the day has to be that way. I can consciously choose to move in a different direction, but it's going to require some deliberate, rational thought to move in the other direction. Yeah, you're right. Maybe in a different culture, this wouldn't mean anything, but you're going to get. I'll bet you might get the same reaction if what you saw as a frown, they see as a smile. So the principle is the same, although the cultural inputs are a little bit different. Eureka write Professor Kahneman at Princeton and see what he says. The thoughts. I think it's important to keep in mind that the thoughts and actions that are generally guided by intuition, which is a system 1 response, are generally on the mark, and we can't live without them. I mean, there's no way we can navigate society without having a sense of these things. But intuition also creates biases and flawed decisions that if not monitored by rationality and more info, are going to get us into trouble. A few more details here may make this a little easier to grasp. So I say System 1 operates automatically and quickly with no effort or sense of voluntary action. System 2 requires effort to allocate attention to a given task. System 1 originates impressions and feelings that become the source of the beliefs and choices of System 2. Now, interestingly enough, controlling thoughts and behavior, which is a System 2 task, because it's difficult, depletes energy in a very concrete way. Having to engage in deliberate thought for any given amount of time eats up glucose, which is the food that the brain lives on. So conscious deliberate thought is an energy depleting exercise. This is why, and this is where I'm going to bring this around to what's important for us as mediators. This is one of the reasons why when you engage in a mediation, it's important to feed people, to make sure they're fed before, to give them food during, provide breaks to afterwards, because if they get too tired, get too cranky, get too energy depleted, System 2 is not going to work adequately. The default is going to be to fall back on System 1 to help you make decisions. The decision-making process will not work. There's a great example of this in Kahneman's book, research done by somebody else. a survey done of, I think there were 8 judges in Israel who were responsible for processing paroles. And statistically, the number of paroles that were granted was about 35%. In other words, 65% of the paroles would, as a matter of course, be denied. The researcher found that the closer the further the closer decisions were made to a period of rest and feeding on the part of the judges, the higher the percentage of paroles that were granted. The further that the judges got from being fed and being rested, well, the more likely they were to resort to the default mechanism, which was, we'll just deny the parole, and resort to the 35% average. And this was all, presumably these judges thought that they were rational people and whatnot in making these decisions. But as it turns out, much of what they were doing was this interaction between System 1 and System 2 was controlled by something as simple as whether or not they'd eaten, within the last hour or two.
That's really
Which is kind of a cranky, kind of a scary proposition.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
That scares the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it scares the hell out of anybody, but for those of us who practice law or done any kind of trial work or been at the mercy of judges, it sort of explains why when they're if the judge is cranky and tired and whatnot,
I'm feeling better now.
you're likely to get a bad deal. Then you're likely to lose rather than to win. If winning requires more thought. This is the researchers call this the depletion effect. That your energy runs down, and as a result, it's more likely that you're going to resort to System 1 to make decisions, and you won't be engaging in the kind of deliberate, rational thought that may be necessary to make a sound decision. Tired and hungry judges tend to fall back on the easier default. Couple of other some other characteristics of System 1, and you can draw conclusions from these as to System 2, and there are a lot of nuances to this. System 1 generates impressions, feelings, and inclinations. When endorsed by System 2, these become beliefs, attitudes, and intentions. Operates automatically and quickly with little or no effort and no sense of voluntary control. Creates a coherent pattern of activated ideas and associative memory. I'll give an example of this later on. It's a complicated language, but it's an interesting phenomenon about how associating ideas with one another can dictate our behavior. Well, I'll give you an example right off. This is another one that's kind of scary. If Shell and I decide to go out for a walk and just have a chat about anything in general, we may maintain a certain pace. If we start talking about retirement, the likelihood is our pace will start to slow, and we will walk slower than when we're not talking about retirement. In other words, the mind will automatically, when the subject matter is something like retirement, which brings up, conjures up images of old age, inability to function, all those sorts of things, the body automatically responds and slows up, and your pace is slower than it would be otherwise. This is what these the heuristics people call the ideal motor effect. The juxtaposition or the relationship between that ideas and their association will have on behavior. Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I interrupt you. I was just gonna say that's like saying where the mind goes, the man follows.
Mind over.
Where the mind goes, the man follows.
Well, I mean, that's essentially, in very general terms, you know, that's essentially what, what's occurring here. Let's see if there's anything else, about System 1 that's helpful to keep in mind.
Angie has a.
Joe,
I'm sorry.
I think the other thing you see in mediation, especially with long-term couples, is something that you and I would perceive as just a normal conversation. They perceive it as having certain triggers depending on the tone of the conversation, because they go to what has happened in the past and then they engage in that. So that's definitely something that we see as mediators, whereas we're having a regular conversation and then someone says something that triggers someone else to have a response that seems to you and I as, what is that response about? And they're going to that immediate first level.
Well, right, and I think what that describes in part, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, is what you see played out again and again is what's called self-fulfilling prophecy, okay? How many times have you been in a you had, could be domestic, it could be a business dispute, and you come up with a, you make a suggestion, or you have what may be almost a deal on the table, and one of the parties says, she's never going to do that. But they're never going to abide by that. And they're hearkening back to past behavior, all of these negative behaviors, and imputing these negative behaviors to them in a way that precipitates exactly the response that the person had in their head, and you get and you reach impasse or a deal craters. That's exactly what we're the kind of thing we're talking about. I think the basic lesson for the mediators, but this is something that we really have to keep in mind, is that that if you're going to make a progress, you have to be aware of the two systems, and the fact that rational decision making, brainstorming, creative thinking is going to reach a point where you have to do some hard work to sort things out, and you got to keep people on task. And one of the ways you do that, as I've suggested before, is making sure that they're well fed and taken care of, so that they don't deplete that the depletion effect is not set in a deal crater simply because that people are tired and cranky. Chuck?
Seems to me the same principle applies to the mediator.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We get cranky sometimes.
There's no question about it, and it may be, in fact, I think that's an even greater danger.
Are you feeling depleted, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. Dehydrated. No, I think that's an even greater danger. I mean, just speaking from my own experience, when I've gone too long, it often happens. You figure, we're going to get this done in the next 2 or 3 hours, so you end up skipping lunch, and by 2 or 3 in the afternoon, you're pissed at everybody, because
stuff that you could deal with patiently and calmly suddenly starts cranking you up.
Right.
Joe?
It seems very too simple. I mean, but a reminder of how the systems interrelate and how physical we are is important to keep in mind. Al?
Well, I have to advise you that Belinda, via Sally, has advised us in the small claims division, mediators do not get a meal budget.
Well, perhaps this is a good reason to change the
Small claims we don't.
change the policy of the DRC I wanted to follow up on that. I gave this example of Shell and I have talking about retirement and the pace slowing. The example of this, the relationship between mind and idea of the mind and physically what you do. The research indicates that if you vote in a school, you're more likely to look favorably upon a millage than if the voting occurs in another forum. Money has a way of priming or triggering individualism. And it turns out that actions and emotions can be primed by, this indicates, by events of which we're not even aware. Repetition repetition leads to familiarity of thought, making us more likely to accept what is being repeated. This is one reason why, if you look at North Korea, you see pictures of dear leader all over, and you see this constant sloganeering that is typical of totalitarian regimes. The mere function of repeating and repeating breeds a degree of familiarity on the part of the populace that dampens spontaneous thought and individual action. You have people sort of marinating in a system one response and much less likely to engage in critical behavior that would be antagonistic to the regime. But I will provide a few more little tidbits or examples, but I want to make sure I want to get through the top 10 psychological traps if I don't do anything else. Ann?
So I think there's another issue about food. Food is a method of bonding as well. Because I know in some of the mediations that we have that are long-term, people reach over for food and they have that sharing experience.
Mm-hmm.
And if they choose the same food, they have more of a sharing experience. I think that food is a very big critical point in a longer-term mediation.
And we have a heuristic for that. It's called the affect heuristic. Okay. If I like you, if I like you, I'm going to tend to engage in behaviors and do things that I might not otherwise do, simply because we have established a rapport. I will attribute to you aspects or features that you may not even have. I'll give you an example that these folks use. I don't know Betty. I meet Betty at a party, and she seems like a really nice lady, and the chemistry seems good, and we kind of like one another. I leave the party with warm and fuzzy thoughts about Betty, and a couple of weeks later, I'm meeting with somebody. We're talking about raising money for a charity fundraiser. Generosity is a good thing in my mind. So I'm likely, even though I just met Betty a week or 2 weeks ago and barely know her, because I think Betty is good, and generosity is good, I'm likely to think that Betty is a generous person. And I'm likely to give her a call, even though I don't have the foggiest idea. She could be as stingy as the day is long, but because I think Betty is good, and because generosity is good, I tend to associate the two together, when logically that makes absolutely no sense. But that is the way the mind-body connection works, and the interaction works between System 1 and System 2. Okay, I got to do the top 10 psychological traps.
So no more questions until after you get through those?
No, you can interrupt any time. It's just that you're making it more difficult for me to get through what.
And he'll get cranky.
What I absolutely, absolutely. These are not in any order of priority. Okay, I mean, I don't think you could say one is more. We could argue about whether one is more important than another, but I sort of take them in alphabetical order. And the first most of you are familiar with in some way, shape, or form, and that's the whole concept of anchoring, which is the process by which we we form an estimate of an unsure value by comparing it to something we know or to a number which we are exposed, which is then planted in the brain, okay? So, I asked you earlier, I lied about the global awareness business, okay? Al and the folks to my right were given sheets of paper with a $90 million person figure on it, and Andy and those to my left were given a sheet of paper with a 40 million figure for the population of turkeys. So what was the average for you folks, Ruth?
45 million.
45 million. And the average for you was?
94.
94. Eureka! This is why heuristics is based on the, does anybody know the actual population of Turkey?
80 million.
I Googled it last night, it's about 68 million.
No, it's 80 million.
80 million?
They
Boy, I
grew
thought, they said as of
overnight.
2015, I thought it was 67 or whatever. Doesn't matter what it is.
There's currently 27,000 of them are in prison right now.
Well, that may be, okay. But this illustrates to a T how anchoring works and how it works in a wholly unconscious manner. Unless you knew what the population of Turkey was, you were disposed to lean one way or the other by the numbers that I gave you on the sheet. And this is a technique that's obviously well known in marketing. You know why? You know when stuff looks good, it looks good when it's on sale. You know because they're marketing at 10 or 20% off. You know these are just arbitrary numbers they're throwing out there. And you know I fight with people in the family all the time about the value of these sales, but you know they're tricked nevertheless. And this is also why the plaintiffs' lawyers go off in one direction with the plaintiffs' verdicts, the latest plaintiffs' verdicts, and the defense lawyers go off in another direction with the latest defense verdicts. I guess the message here, one of the things for mediators. I mean, assuming you recognize or acknowledge the legitimacy of the phenomenon, and it's been demonstrated enough. I think that we really can't argue it. And since it happens so often, what's the lesson for mediators? You know, how do you as a mediator deal with it?
Deal with what?
Shell.
One thing that I've been saying for the last couple of years with first offers is that this is now the hottest topic in advanced mediator training, dealing with opening offers.
Mm-hmm.
And I point out the principle of reciprocity. If you give a very aggressive opening demand, Mr. Plaintiff or Mrs. Plaintiff, you're going to get an overly aggressive, deeply disappointing response from the other side.
Right.
And so I try to manage expectations a little bit and encourage thinking about reciprocity to get more productive numbers at the beginning of mediation.
Right. Good. And I think that's everybody heard what Shell said. I mean, I think that's a very solid way of dealing with the dynamic that you have to. What's I can tease out of what Shell said is that making the first offer can often be a matter of contention. Should I go first or should I not go first? Anchoring would suggest you go first because it's a chance to lay down a marker that may psychologically affect the other person. But what Shell has called reciprocity, the heuristics folks would say is reactive devaluation, which is whatever the other side comes up with is not good for me. I mean, that's the system one natural response. Okay, when you're in conflict, and that's the kind of response you deal with there. You've got a sky high demand is going to precipitate a lowball offer. You know, whatever he comes up with, it's got to be bad for me, so I'm going to move in the opposite direction. So the two sort of work in tension. That's why you have to, I think, go about it in a more nuanced way as you're suggesting, because if you just let anchoring go by itself, it's likely to precipitate reactive devaluation, and people are going to reach impasse because somebody's going to be at a very high number, somebody's going to be at a very low, and you're going to be stuck before you even get out of the box. Number two is confirmation bias. Red wine and chocolate are good. You like the New York Times? I like what shows up in the Wall Street Journal. These are appeals to System 1, and System 2 would require me to do a lot more work. You know, if you're a devoted, and I don't mean to, it's just that politics is an easy way to make the illustration. If you are really devoted, committed to the editorial page of the New York Times, it's going to be painful for you to read the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, and vice versa. But if you really exercise System 2, you're going to have to concede that sometimes they come up with some good ideas in the Wall Street Journal, and sometimes they come up with good ideas in the New York Times. But to get there, it's much easier just to feed the bias and to, you know, go along to get along, and let System 1 cruise, which it will do, unless you invoke System 2 to moderate it and check it out. Do we critically analyze appealing arguments, or vice versa? Or, you know, do we like them simply because System 1 likes them? System 1 favors uncritical acceptance of suggestion and exaggeration. Interestingly enough, of the likelihood of extreme and improbable events. Example given, if I were to ask you, well, you know, what do you think the likelihood is within the next 30 years that a tsunami will take out California? You know, you're liable to, you know, you'll probably conjure up all of these. Oh my God, these images of we had of tsunamis past, and you know, the wholesale destruction that this would cause, and move off in one direction. When in fact, if you thought about it under System 2, the likelihood of a tsunami hitting California and doing any degree of appreciable damage is probably as close to zero as you're gonna get. But simply making the suggestion that the tsunami is going to conjure up images and ideas in the mind that is going to make an improbable event seem far more likely unless you invoke System 2 to critically examine your intuitive response. Consensus error, also called projection. I don't have to dwell on this. What I like, you like, and vice versa. You know, I mean, because I see the world the way I do, and I think Angie sees the world in exactly the same way I do, my natural tendency is to think that the things that I like, Angie is going to like. When in fact, if you critically examine who she is and who I am, that clearly ain't going to be the case. But projection is a System 1 response. And if you look at your family, you know, you look at your work life, you see it all the time. Framing is another one. This is another one that mediators are familiar with. We're all told, you know, how you frame the question, or how you put it, is critically important. And it's because framing is a heuristic device, and one that's very important to mediators. Asking a priest if you can smoke while you pray is likely to result in a different answer than asking him if you can pray while you smoke. What is more reassuring, you know, for me to tell you, it's unfortunate that you have cancer, but you've got a 90% survival rate, or it's unfortunate you have cancer, but geez, the mortality rate is 10%. Far more reassuring, far more likely to elicit a positive response
What's this
to
one called
frame
again,
the.
Joe?
Hmm?
What's it called again, this one?
This is framing. When we talk about framing, and this is the device that these folks have identified. And this is what, this is why the marketers, why it's, 90% fat-free, they're not gonna say 1% fat, or 10% fat, they're gonna say 90% fat, or they're not gonna say, it's 60% gluten as opposed to 40% non-gluten. I mean, the same mechanism comes into play. And this trips another heuristic device, which is called loss aversion. We have an aversion to loss, but not a similar liking for gain. So if something can be phrased as a gain as opposed to a loss, you're way ahead. You're way ahead as a mediator. Angie, you were going to.
What are some of your thoughts on framing? Because if we're all operating on this first level, including the mediator, you might be operating in a method that might be skewing a level 2 analysis. So what can you tell us that could help us sort of do a reality check or check in on it?
I think the basic assumption should be, hopefully, in an ideal world, you'll be operating most of the time in system 2 and you'll be operating in system 1, but your client is not going to know about it, or they're not going to be as aware of these problems and pitfalls as you are. I think the antidote to whatever you do, you want to get people to into a more of a thinking mode rather than a reacting mode. Okay, I mean, eventually that's where I think you've got to get people. And I think the basic way that most mediators do that is by asking good questions. I mean, it's really in asking good questions, not making suggestions or whatever, but really teasing and challenging the brain that you get people out of system 1 kind of reactions. Now, I think that's the basic fallback position for any mediator. And it doesn't matter what kind of rational, emotional position somebody has taken. Now, they may not listen to, they may be incapable of comprehending your question. I mean, they just may not have the wherewithal. They may emotionally be so blocked off that they can't respond. But I think the tool in many of these cases is to ask really good questions that tax system 2 rather than have the person rely upon the default mechanisms of system 1. Her reactive devaluation I talked about a little bit. This is, the Democrat, if you're a Democrat, Republican's bad. If you're a Republican, Democrat's bad. Whatever the other side wants or suggests is bad for me. Selective perception is another one, and this is I talked about this a little bit in general at first, because this is really the basis for self-fulfilling prophecies and stereotypes. Because of self-perception, we engage in self-fulfilling prophecy and stereotyping. As Thoreau said, we see the world we look for. Self-fulfilling prophecy essentially means that we expect people to behave in certain ways, and we react toward them in a way that's consistent with that perception. And our behavior tends to precipitate the very behavior that we had in our mind to begin with. And this to me is and I haven't seen a really good neurobiological explanation of how this works, but it's kind of convinced me that whether we believe it or not, we're all somehow intimately connected on a very basic level we don't even appreciate. I mean, how else could this mechanism operate unless there was some kind of connection between us? And if you examine your family, your own behavior and whatnot, you see this all over the place. Is crazy Uncle Charlie because he really is crazy, Or is he that way because from the time he was a little kid or a young man, because of certain things he did and whatnot, he was treated in a certain way, and the family came to perceive or think about him in a way that reinforced over and over and again the negative behavior that he engaged in. You see this all the time in terms of race relations. If I'm not brought up with people of color, whatever that color may be, whether it's white, black, yellow, or brown, but I have in my mind ideas and notions that I picked up from the paper and picked up from other places, and I've had no exposure to people of color, and I encounter a person of color with these perceptions in my mind, I may react to that person with some suspicion, some trepidation and whatnot, which triggers in them a counter response to the way I have behaved. So we end up reinforcing negative behavior in one another because of the way we act out of our perceptions. It's really an insidious kind of dynamic and phenomenon. But if you're honest with yourself and look at your family and your colleagues and whatnot, you see this operating over and over again. Stereotyping is more common, I think. And we tend to regard stereotyping as negative, not because, but it's not always bad. Stereotyping helps us navigate to a certain extent, and try and figure out, good versus, who might be a threat, who might not be a threat. The danger is if you use, simplistic generalizations to apply to everyone, rather than invoke system 2 and figure out, well, maybe you don't square with the perception in my head, and maybe you should be treated as a unique person, all on your own. Betty, you had your hand up.
Just when you said that about it's insidious, I think about even more than that, it's institutional, and what's bothered me a lot over the years is how those things have been funded for basic research so that we can figure out how different we are, how different you and I are, as opposed to things that we have in common.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get funding for that. I remember seeing funding back in, I forget what year it was early on, and somebody was going to do the difference in the Negro clavicle
Mm-hmm.
and what your clavicle would be.
Mhm.
We really need to know how those are different.
Mhm.
So, we're just buying into this whole scale.
But it's not surprising, is it? I mean, if this is kind of the way we're wired on an individual basis, it's not surprising that that on a societal scale that this would happen. But again, the antidote is to keep in mind that this is a system 1 response, and that while generally it's going to be a pretty accurate navigator, this is one area where it creates a serious bias that maybe is totally wrong. With these learned patterns of behavior. I want to. There's a few other little tidbits here that I want to include. The self-serving bias is the last of the top 10, and here I'm basically responsible for my successes. Is the failures, it's bad luck, or it was Andy's fault. It wasn't really anything I did, and we're all doing the same. We're all doing the same thing. The good stuff we do is attributable to our own efforts. The failures and the misses are due to are totally due to somebody else. I have a good reason for being late. You're late because you're rude and inconsiderate. It's that kind of making excuses for ourselves.
Success has many fathers, failure is an orphan.
There you go. Let me with the time I have left, I want to leave a few other tidbits here. Oh, I forgot this. I did talk about priming. Priming is related to anchoring. The example I gave about Shell and I talking about retirement and walking slower, voting in a school makes you more likely to vote for a millage. Pictures of dear leader are more likely to make you subservient. Those are all examples of priming, which is kind of a cousin to anchoring. I mentioned also the affect. Well, it's called the affect heuristic, and what it means essentially is that your likes and dislikes tend to determine your beliefs about the world. Your political preference determines the arguments that you find compelling. Those with a hawkish view of foreign policy tend to think that other countries are weak. Those of us that have more dovish views on foreign policy tend to think that opposing countries are strong. These are system one responses. Cognitive ease is another heuristic concept. It's generally easier for us to swallow things that are easy. We're more compatible, more congenial when the concepts are easy than when they're made difficult. This is certainly true in terms of advertising language. The more simple you can put things, the more you can use appealing colors, that sort of thing, the more likely people are to swallow the message, because they're catering to system one. Interesting exercise, really fascinating exercise about familiarity. And an experiment that was done, ads were put in the student paper for Michigan State and the student paper for the University of Michigan. Don't ask me when. Little block ads on the front page of each newspaper for several weeks running, and the ads displayed words in Turkish, which presumably none of the students would understand. Some of the words were repeated more often than others in both newspapers. They would appear several times. Some words would appear only once. After the ads disappeared, a couple weeks later, surveys were done of the students, and they were asked which of the words they thought were good and which of the words they thought were bad. And the words that they thought were good were the ones that had been repeated more often than the other words. Now, these kids didn't know a word of Turkish, okay? But simply by dint of repetition and familiarity, they became more comfortable with certain words and regarded them as good as opposed to bad. That's, you know, it's kind of a, this is what is called the exposure effect. Mere exposure reduces cognitive strain and is less likely to have you trip system 2 as opposed to relying upon system 1. So, you know, generally, I mean, if you want to appeal to people, you got to make things easy for them. This is true even of system 2, because system 2 tends to be lazy. Would rather rely on a default mechanism than not. There's a judgment heuristic. This I think is a great one. System 1, as I've already alluded to, helps us make basic assessments about people. Are you a friend or are you a foe? Simply based upon your appearance, demeanor, that sort of thing. We all make these judgments about one another. And we evaluate people at a glance, determining whether or not, you know, are they somehow dominant? Do they pose a threat to us? Do they appear trustworthy? Or, that is to say, friendly or hostile? Now, this is an imperfect ability, this is an imperfect device, but through the years, it's generally served people pretty well as a survival tactic in terms of determining, you know, who your friends are and who your enemies are and that sort of stuff. In a very in a very general sense. And interestingly enough, this has an influence, perhaps not surprising to some of you if you really think about this, has an influence on voting. People tend to find, in pictures, a square chin, a good smile. There are facial features that surveys indicate seem to emanate or trigger notions of trustworthiness and competence, just by the way people look. And a study was done of, I think they did this with Princeton students. They showed a group of Princeton students photographs of politicians, their official photographs of various people who were running for office, and that's all they showed them. And the students were asked to grade the pictures as far as how trustworthy or competent they thought the politicians were, and to rank the politicians accordingly, knowing nothing else. And as it turned out, there was a 70% correlation between the preferences of the students based solely upon the pictures with the actual voting results of senators, congressmen, and governors. So as a result of this, the political scientists, and these are the folks, regardless of your political predilections, they're preying upon us now with God knows what results. The political scientists try to identify voters for whom the automatic responses of System 1 are likely to play a larger role. And they find that these are generally politically uninformed voters, and I leave it to you to define politically uninformed, who watch a lot of television. Politically uninformed voters, regardless of the persuasion, who watch a lot of television, are far more likely to be influenced by how a politician appears than what he or she says or what kind of policies they espouse. And the effect of facial competence on voting is about 3 times larger for the information poor and TV prone voters. So if you think the folks at Apple and Google and whatnot are working the algorithms, for your shopping preferences, this is what's really, kind of scary to me is that these folks are working on this kind of stuff too. And of course you've seen this in recent political campaigns with some very sophisticated ways of targeting voters to figure out, what our preferences are and how we're likely to vote in a given way. So, and the moral of the story, I guess, is if you slide with System 2, you could get yourself in trouble, or at least you could end up with a result that was uncritically arrived at. But to invoke System 2 is going to require some real effort. Let me give you. Let me pass these around, so at least you have a list of these
While
things.
you were thinking about the faces, I was thinking of the Kennedy-Nixon debates.
That's a good example. But what this does is tease out via a lot of research, a lot of good research. What we all intuitively our response to Kennedy-Nixon was, in the first instance, was a System 1 response.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Kennedy looked really good, and Richard Nixon looked ill-shaven and sweaty. So the people had immediate reactions to that undoubtedly affected the result.
Joe, would you mind if you take a quick look at the book that you're writing?
Oh, the book again. The thought I want to leave you with is what's written on the bottom of the page here. Keep in mind that these are tendencies. None of this is absolute. Always black and white, without nuance. With just that there's a lot of research that moves in these directions that undergirds this whole notion of System 1 and System 2 and how we make decisions. But the thought I want to leave you is at the very bottom of this page, and I'll read this to you. Human communication is the interaction of two individuals, each of whom believes that she alone understands both herself and the other, while in fact neither really understands herself or the other, and neither seeks to gain understanding because each thinks she already has it. Perhaps more surprising than the amount of miscommunication and conflict in the world is the fact that, at least occasionally, accurate communication does take place. I mean, when you think about this, when you read this stuff and think about it, it really is amazing that we can communicate with one another at all and reach agreement on any level. But being an optimist and a glass half full guy, there's hope for all of us. Any other questions about this? I commend the book to you, and as I say, it's not an easy read, but it's full of these scary research and studies that we've done that demonstrate again and again how prone we are to rely on our gut, and how often it can be wrong. He's got some very good examples in there about the law of small numbers, how oftentimes you can be tricked by the media's presentation of things because most of us are so statistically illiterate, and we're unwilling to engage in the math that's necessary to look at these things that are thrown out at us and to recognize that much of it is really bogus from a logical standpoint. But the book is replete with examples like that. Anything else?
Has there ever been any criticism of that book, or is that taken as
the truth? I don't know, Tom. I'm sure he has his critics. But these guys have been at it for 30 years plus, and having won a Nobel Prize 15 years ago for having done this. I mean,
you're appealing to my System 1.
Yeah, that's true.
Nobel Prize.
That's true. I am. Yeah, but.
Of course, the Nobel Prize was in botany.
Oh, did I not mention that? Did I not mention that?
And runner-up was Bob Dylan.
But anyway, that's it. If you don't have any other questions, good luck. Don't be misled by